Nestled in the geographic center of Tennessee, the town of Murfreesboro has grown to cover the land that once surrounded it. On its western side, the urban sprawl gives way to woods, sprawling fields, and limestone rock formations. While this land gives a peaceful respite from modern life to many, 162 years ago, this landscape was a cold and muddy tomb of the nation's Civil War. In the waning days of 1862, the banks of the Stones River would play host to one of the larger but still more forgotten battles of the war. However, what happened here in its time would serve to further legitimize the Union's new stated war goal of ending slavery, disincentivize Britain from joining the war, and open a path for the march towards Atlanta. The latter half of 1862 had been a time of great success for the Confederate States of America. Rebel victories in the Shenandoah Valley, the outskirts of Richmond, and the Second Battle of Manassas had given the South a distinct advantage in the eastern theater of the war. The war had entered its second bloody year, thus instilling in the minds both Northerners and Southerners alike that this would not be a short conflict. For many in the North, it had become obvious that in order for the war to be considered a success, the abolition of slavery would have to take place. As James McDonough wrote in his book On Stones River, quote, "Whether or not slavery in some sense caused the Civil War is actually besides the point. The decisive factor was that many Northern people thought slavery caused the war. Therefore, in increasing numbers, they demanded that to the aim of restoring the Union must be added the destruction of slavery. Due to this, President Abraham Lincoln had seen fit to introduce his Emancipation Proclamation, declaring all slaves in rebelling territory to be free. In order for this proclamation to not seem like a desperate attempt among the wave of Confederate success in 1862, Lincoln would point to the recent bloody strategic Union victory at Antietam. The coming clash at Stones River, though, would give the Confederacy an opportunity to delegitimize this move by Lincoln. Also surrounding this situation was the looming threat of Britain either entering the war for the South or at least installing a friendly foreign policy with them. The South's cotton industry had been a major resource to Britain's textile business, and despite their dislike for the institution of slavery, some in the UK still saw benefit to siding with the South. In a Manchester newspaper, the argument was made, quote, "We know that for all mercantile purposes, England is one of the states, and that, in effect, we are partners with the Southern planter. We hold a bill of sale over his goods and chattels, his live and dead stock, and take a lion's share in the profit of slavery. Yet, as a nation, we are staunch abolitionists." As a rule, Britain also would not want to be seen as allying itself with a lost cause, and even with the Union's victory at Antietam, the Confederate cause was still seen by most as far from lost. The dominant Confederate victory following Antietam at Fredericksburg, as well as a possible victory in the looming clash at Murfreesboro, very well could have given the Confederacy an appearance of an upper hand, thus leading to Britain possibly maintaining good relations with the South. As to why a battle was looming in the first place, one only needs to examine the strategic value of Murfreesboro. Railroads running from Nashville to Chattanooga gave this small town its value, and was the main reason Murfreesboro had been occupied by the Federals once before. That is, until Confederate cavalry commander Nathan Bedford Forrest surrounded and captured the town earlier in the year of 1862. This victory, however, would not be the end of conflict for the town. Following a defeat at Perryville, Kentucky, the Confederate Army of Tennessee retreated first to Knoxville, then to Murfreesboro to lick their wounds. The Union Army followed, but settled in Nashville to regather strength and build defenses to counter any future attempts to retake the recently lost rebel state capital. Encamped in Murfreesboro, Confederate General Braxton Bragg was readying the force he had recently been put in command of for a possible move of Union forces from Nashville. Confederate President Jefferson Davis was in camp visiting with Bragg, who was pleading his case with Davis to concentrate troops in Murfreesboro. Davis, however, ignored him, instead detaching cavalry from Bragg and sending them west to Vicksburg. Meanwhile in Nashville, the Federal Army planned its next moves. The commanding general Don Carlos Buell had recently been relieved of duty after failing to respond to raids by Nathan Bedford Forrest and John Hunt Morgan. The army was now in command of William S. Rosecrans, or Old Rosie, as his men affectionately called him. Hearing of Davis's decision to detach cavalry from Bragg's army, Rosecrans decided to strike Murfreesboro in force. In total, The Union Army comprised of 44,000 men across 3 corps, having an estimated advantage of 7,000 men over the rebel force of some 37,000. As the Christmas season began to set in, the opposing forces drew closer together. The days became shorter, and the weather turned wet and cold. By December 30th, 1862, the two armies had come to meet each other on the outskirts of Murfreesboro, straddling the winding Stones River. The men settled in for another cold and rainy night, awaiting the impending battle that the next day held, when suddenly, something unprecedented in the war took place. As the armies settled around their fires, the bands of each side began to play different songs, instigating a brief battle of the bands on each side. One band, though, began to play the song Home Sweet Home, which other bands slowly picked up. Eventually, all across the battlefield, a choir of blue and gray were singing of their home sweet home that many knew they would not live to see again. The first day of battle began in the early hours of December 31st, 1862, when the Federal right was suddenly attacked by Confederate forces. The Union right was not prepared for this early morning assault and was promptly pushed back into the woods behind them. As they retreated, the Union line began to fold back onto itself, causing mass chaos and confusion among the ranks. On their retreat north, many of the Union divisions had run across large limestone rock formations that carved across the edge of the forest. Seeing these rocks, the decision was made for some to hold firm at this point in the line, as to not allow the entire Union army to be outflanked and destroyed. This holding action, while key to allowing the Union lines to reform further north, was somewhat of a suicidal mission. The rocks were soon surrounded on 3 sides, and what was once an excellent defensive fortress of nature became a maze that would trap many Federal troops. The Confederates slaughtered the holding Union troops, causing the ground between the rocks to pool with blood. This later led to some Union soldiers describing the rocks as a slaughter pen. By noon, the Union line had been forced north to the Nashville Turnpike, where it formed an angle running west and north on a small stretch of land. Here, Rosecrans placed Major General George H. Thomas and his men to hold the point against the advancing rebels. What came to be known as Hell's Half Acre saw the most brutal but most important fighting of the first day. Here at the angle, the Union held the Confederates to a bloody standstill. Seeing this momentum stalling, Bragg moved troops from his right on the other side of the Stones River to his left, in hopes of crushing the wall of blue that his ocean of gray had crashed onto. George H. Thomas and his men, though, would hold firm, stopping the Confederate advance and saving the Union Army from collapse on the first day. The second day of battle brought with it a new year. Although New Year's Day was the second day of battle, little if any fighting took place. For the most part, both armies spent the hours reforming and planning for what was to come. The Union Army had been pushed north to the Nashville Turnpike and was holding the ground that it had held the first day. Additionally, Rosecrans ordered troops to occupy the high ground on the Union left, on the opposite side of the Stones River. January 2nd, 1862 would be the third and decisive day of battle. Bragg, seeing the isolated Union troops atop the high ground on his right, ordered the capture of the hill by John C. Breckinridge, former Vice President of the United States. Early in the afternoon, a rebel force of 5,000 men made the march up the hill to dislodge a Federal garrison they outnumbered 2-1. The charging Confederates smashed into and routed the Union lines, forcing the Federals to retreat down the hill and back across the Stones River. This was the high point for the Confederates, as many gave chase to the retreating Federals. However, they were met with a thunderous crash of artillery fire from the opposing bank of the river. The attacking rebels had pushed too far and were devastated by the deadly accurate fire of Union cannons. Being described by James McDonough, quote, as if the Rebs had opened the door of hell and the devil himself was there to greet them. The battered Confederates retreated back to their original lines and would never return to continue the fight. Bragg, seeing no way to remove Rosecrans from the field of battle, retreated further south to Tullahoma. The fight was a tactical win for the Confederates, but the Union held Murfreesboro and its valuable rail lines, making it a strategic win for them. After the fog had cleared, nearly 25,000 casualties had been suffered by both sides. In the years since the end of the Civil War, the Battle of Stones River has slowly faded into obscurity. Even today, if you ask someone in Tennessee about important battles of the war, many wouldn't even have Stones River cross their minds. But, in its time, This conflict in the small town of Murfreesboro served to legitimize the Emancipation Proclamation, as well as put a nail in the coffin of the South's hope for Britain to intervene. The railroads captured gave the Union complete control of the central Middle Tennessee, forcing the rebels to Chattanooga and ending any serious threat to Nashville. In a very broad sense, the battle for Tennessee was over, and the war for the country remained.